Everybody, welcome to the Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we redeem men's conversations, talk about the right things in the right ways. My name is Scott Hatfield. I'm honored that you're checking out our podcast. And whether you're a high school student, a college student, young adult, or a grown man, whether you're wrestling with faith or new to faith, learning or growing, or even maturing your faith, regardless of where you are, this is a topic that we must get our minds around, that we should really wrestle with. The part that we play on a daily basis will be helpful for us to understand that we've got to be aware personally. We should have other men that are helping us fight these intentional battles. Again, you're going, what? Well, we're going to talk about it here in a second. And whether you're taking a walk or working out or cutting grass or just sitting and watching or listening to this one, it will be really relevant for you and for all of us as men. Today's a big one, so I wanted to take time that we needed to kind of walk through this, and so we're going to do it in two parts. I think once you understand the topic and you begin to kind of get a feel for where we're going over the next couple of minutes, I think you'll realize why we're going to take some time. And so before we get to the two words, what I want you to think about are the words love and hate. We live in a culture that seems to overuse love and hate. I think just as we've overused the word love for everything, like I love pizza, I love Big Blue Nation, I love my wife and kids, they don't have equal meanings. They're not even close. They're in very different categories. And I also think that just as we've done this with love, we've done this with hate. We can even abuse the word hate. We use it all the time in varying degrees. I'll just give you category one, okay? Just think about your category one here. I hate going to the dentist or the doctor, all right? Probably do. You go, yeah, absolutely, I hate that. Or I remember when we didn't have ice maker in our fridge, and we used to use ice trays. Often there were times where I'd go to get a drink and reach into the bucket where the ice is supposed to be, and there's no ice. And then I'd grab for the ice trays, and someone who will go unnamed just took ice out of the tray and didn't fill up the trays behind that. They didn't fill them back up. There's 1 cube of ice left in the tray. Really? I hate that. Or if you're trying to find a parking spot at the mall or in a parking garage, and you finally find this spot and you get closer and closer to it, and you realize that the vehicle that's parked in the next spot didn't, or weren't willing to think about anyone else when they pulled in. They basically are taking up not just their spot, but part of the spot that you were going to go into. Not even because they have an awesome vehicle, just oblivious. I'm too important, or I can't drive well enough to take a look at their park job to see if their 2002 Toyota Camry actually got in between the lines. And I hate that. I hate the ads that play before something that I'm watching on TV or on YouTube. I hate getting hit in the ankle by the grocery cart when my kids are driving the cart. I hate that. It's the worst. And when that happens, they lose their privileges. I hate biting my cheek when I'm eating a meal. All right. There's a million things that we can say about hate or strongly dislike, whether that's slow drivers or long lines or slow internet or snakes or Christian Leitner, any annoying person on social media. Now, all of these may be annoyances or frustrations or inconveniences. And I'm not saying that we don't have disdain for something or someone or even some of these scenarios, but hate is a pretty strong word. So let me just take you to another level or a different category, category two. Here it is. I hate cancer. I hate suicide. I hate racism. I hate domestic violence. I hate divorce. I hate addiction. I hate abuse of any kind, whether it be physical or emotional or verbal or sexual abuse or even spiritual abuse. Now, doesn't that category feel different? Like as I'm saying this, my heart moves to a different level. Why is that? Well, because these statements impact people that we know and people that we love. And if you put any of category one on one side of a scale, and then you put any of category two on the other side of the scale and weigh it, it's not even close. Like long lines versus racism, no brainer. Slow internet versus cancer, no brainer. Empty ice trays versus divorce or abuse. It's really clarifying. And I'll ask the same question again. Why is that? Why does it feel different? Maybe because we've seen how racism has torn up our country. Or maybe you've experienced ridicule because of your skin color. Maybe you've been told or you've experienced from others that your life is not as important, that you're not as valuable, that you're less than because of your melanin. And I hate the mindset that someone can take on or look at someone that's different than they are and believe that they're not made in the image of God, Imago Dei. Or maybe you or a loved one is in a battle with cancer and you've lost someone that you love from cancer. I have a wife that's 19-year cancer survivor, but I remember the doctor's appointments and the treatments and sitting with my wife. I remember as they dumped chemotherapy into her body. I remember her losing her hair. I remember all the surgeries. I remember how consuming a bad diagnosis became for us. We've all been touched by it. I pray for so many people that I love, that I've met in church, that are in a battle with cancer, and I hate cancer of every kind. Or maybe you grew up in a home where there was domestic violence, and you witnessed it, or maybe you even experienced it. And it's not something that you forget. And the statistics about domestic violence are really rampant. It's overwhelming. And I hate domestic violence. I also hate divorce. Maybe just the word divorce brings up all kinds of emotions for you because it takes you back to the family that you had growing up. I remember talking to my dad in the middle of their divorce and hearing him say, "Son, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy." It's not just the parents, though. It's also the kids. Divorce leaves gaping holes and wounds in the kids that are a part of this family, and it creates this collateral damage. And it wounds kids in so many ways, devastating ways. Or maybe that's been your story. You never thought that this would happen to you. You got married, you stood on a stage, and you expressed some vows, and you thought, this is forever. And now you're in the middle of it, or you're trying to partner with God to heal from a recent divorce. It's grueling. I hate divorce. Or addiction. We all know people that we love and we care about that are in a battle that never seems to cease. Or there's moments where things are good and then there's relapse. I've had so many conversations with men that I'm trying to help, and I tell them, listen, I've got people, I've got programs, I've got counseling, I've got connections, and I've tried to even help them get employment. And it sounds like they're ready, and they sound like they're at the bottom. Like I tell them that this can be the bottom. You don't have to keep digging. I tell them that it's going to be hard. I tell them that it's going to take a hell of a lot of self-discipline. It's going to take people, and I've got great people in our church that would be amazing for them to connect with. It's going to take transparency. You're going to have to be honest, and it's going to take time, a long time to rebuild trust. It's going to take time. You can get here overnight. You're not going to climb out of it tomorrow, but with God's help and with God's people, things can change. Not overnight, but over time. And I make calls, and I follow back up with them, and I can't get them to call me back, or I can't get them to take a step, or I can't get them to put down the shovel and stop digging deeper. I can't get them to wave the white flag and surrender. Addiction tears up people and marriages and families in a horrific way. Suicide. I've sat with far too many moms and dads, or husbands and wives, or sons and daughters that have been devastated because of suicide. They just believe one of Satan's biggest lies, that things could not ever be better, that God can't help you, that people can't help you, that you're a lost cause, that you're hopeless. And they make a decision in a moment, and they take their life, and it leaves this wake of people who are devastated. And I've done far too many funerals for people who believe the lie that they were helpless and hopeless, and that God couldn't change, and that things couldn't be different. So what comes to mind when you hear the word hate? Or maybe even who comes to mind? Maybe you think about a bully that you had growing up, someone that picked on you or beat you up or made you feel like dirt or embarrassed you in front of a bunch of people. Or maybe for you, as you think about who you hate, maybe it's an ex or a former friend or a past business partner or an old girlfriend or even a parent. Or maybe it's someone you trusted and they broke your trust. Or maybe it's someone that you loved and they stopped loving you or took advantage of you. If you have feelings of hate, I get it. I've felt that way in today's locker room conversation. Is really not about looking at your enemies and extending forgiveness. That will be another day, but I think it's important for us to take those things and people to the Lord. Today's about hate. Hating what I think is the most important thing that we could hate, and our two words for today is hate sin. And when I say hate sin, I'll even get us to think about maybe a broader understanding of this, of hating evil. And I wonder if those two words bring on any real anger or rage toward it. I wonder if those land deeper than hating cancer or hating divorce or hating abuse or hating racism, though most of these are sins or a result of them. If it doesn't, I wonder why. I wonder why we don't hate sin. I wonder why we don't just spend time talking about it. And maybe what I want to do is walk us through why, out of all the things in the world that should really fire us up, the one thing that we should hate the most is sin. And I'm not really necessarily talking about the sin that you see in other people. And I'm not talking about the sins that have landed on you. I'm not talking about the sin that drive us crazy that other people commit. I'm talking about just hating sin, all sin. the sin that we see in the world and the sin that we see in our own lives. Do I hate sin? Do I hate the sin that I'm struggling with? Hate is a word that feels very final. It's packed with an intense aversion to or a passion-filled response against, a strong dislike of something or someone. So here's what I've noticed along the way for almost 30 years. Sometimes I think we don't really hate sin. We just hate everyone else's sin. Or maybe we've grown far too comfortable with the sin that we commit. It's almost become like a friend. Or we're in the middle of habitual sin where it just feels like we have no way out, we can't resist it, we don't have the ability to fight or be victorious over it. We live in a world that slings around hate or calls Christ followers hate mongers or bigots, all because they disagree with something or they're resistant toward absolute truth. And it's really confused our culture and even Christians in an effort to quiet God and his word, and maybe even to soften or rename sin to promote an agenda that's evil. Here's a question. How does God view sin? I mean, how does he see it? When God thinks about sin, what are his feelings? Well, we can actually know that based on God's word. God clarifies his heart towards sin. An Old Testament word for sin is chada, which means to go astray, to miss the mark, to miss the path. It refers to a sin or a crime or an offense. It reflects a rebellious attitude toward God and God's commands. In the New Testament, one of the Greek words for sin is hamartia. The origins of this word comes from a martial arts lifestyle of the Greeks. Hamartia means to throw a spear and miss the target. It means to miss God's intentions for us, to not reach our spiritual goals. In the New Testament, it's used as a comprehensive expression of everything against God. There are also two types of sins. Sins of commission. These are sins that we've committed that we shouldn't. God says no, and we step over his loving guardrails, and we say yes. And then we sin, sins of commission. Also, sins of omission. These are sins that we've committed based on inaction. It could be complacency or apathy on our part. It could be we were too fearful to be obedient in something, so we said no. It could be our pride or our fear of being transparent to address something in our own lives, even though it's the best thing for us. God's trying to help us, and we refuse his help. We reject his promptings. We turn away from his commands and refuse to trust his best for our lives. It's like we're drowning, and God hits us with all kinds of life preservers, and we choose to stay trapped in our sin. God tells us to choose something or to go somewhere or to someone and do something or say something, and we don't. God says yes, and we say no. James 4:17 says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. So sins of commission and sins of omission are things that have a big impact on us as men. Failure to trust or obey can have lasting consequences on our lives and with those that we love. The Bible says that we've all sinned. Romans 3:23, for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. According to God, from cover to cover, no one's done it perfectly other than Jesus. It's like we're all hanging off of a really high cliff by a chain. I was over at, yesterday I was over at Red River Gorge, and we stood on top of Natural Bridge, and I envisioned every person hanging off this really high place by a chain. And the question is how many links does have to break for us to fall to our death? And the answer is one. Only one link has to break. And it doesn't matter which link. It doesn't matter if your struggle has been pride or adultery or bitterness or unforgiveness. It doesn't matter if it's a little white lie or an addiction. It doesn't matter if it's sexual sin that was heterosexual in nature or homosexual sin in that nature. It doesn't matter whether it's murder or being jealous of what someone else has. It doesn't matter. We think that there are JV and varsity sins, and here's what's true about us. We think the sins that we struggle with are JV, and the sins that other people struggle with are varsity. Not true. They're all varsity. There are sins that have different consequences on earth, but know this, all sins are varsity. They matter. They matter to God, and they should matter to us. From Adam and Eve to every biblical villain or every biblical hero, they've all fallen short of God's glorious standard for our lives, including you and me. The Bible also says that sin separates us. Before knowing Jesus, sin separates us from God. It's our willful disobedience that separates us from him. Isaiah 59:1-2, it says, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear. But your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sins have hidden his face from you so that he will not hear. God is perfect, and he created us in his image. And he wants creation to reflect the Creator. Be holy as I am holy. The Bible also helps us understand the consequences of our sin. I think there are moments in our lives where we think, you know what, we've escaped the penalty, or no one noticed, or it didn't harm anyone. It's just not true. God sees, and he knows, and he's crystal clear right here in Romans 6:23. It says, for the wage of sin is death. And we all know what a wage is. It's something you earn. God's telling us that sin doesn't just separate us from God, but it's a death sentence, which means that you, me, and everyone you've locked eyes with based on our intentions, our actions, our inactions, motives, words, we've all sinned. We all deserve the wage, and what we deserve and what we've earned is death. Not just physical death, but spiritual death. Two possible destinations for every human soul following death, heaven or hell. There's no in between. There's no purgatory where you get to work real hard and get one more chance. Once you die, that's it. Your eternity is sealed. God is loving, but God is also just. He's not some elderly grandpa that whispers, hey, don't worry about it. I didn't really mean it. Everybody's going to get in. If that's the case, then God would never have sent his son to die an excruciating death on the cross to rescue us from our sin. I mean, if everybody gets in no matter what, then Jesus' death means nothing, was in vain, it has no power, and God is a liar. God spells out his hatred towards sin in Proverbs 6:16-19. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. Here they are: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run toward evil, and a false witness that breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. Okay? Solomon wants us to understand with great clarity that God hates sin. The first one is haughty eyes. It speaks of a spirit of arrogance or a spirit of superiority. I'm better than you, I'm more important than you. God hates that. Or number 2, a lying tongue. God can't stand the way that people deceive and manipulate and spread lies or harm or wound other people with their lies. Number 3, God hates the shedding of innocent blood. Hands that shed innocent blood. God hates unlawful, intentional, premeditated, violent shedding of innocent blood. He's the creator of life, and all life is created in his image, and it matters. Number 4, a heart that devises wicked schemes. God hates it when people conceive or plot, conspire, or manufacture evil against any person or a group for personal benefit, selfish gain, or evil purposes. 5, feet that are quick to rush into evil. God hates it when people exhibit no resistance to sin. They don't fight against it. They don't battle their own flesh, their own desires. They just run towards sin without any concern. Some plot and plan out their sin. Some are dragged towards it by their own evil desires. They just move closer and closer to the edge of a cliff without any hesitation, whether that's affairs or adultery or addiction or any habitual sin can be these type of things. Number 6, a false witness that breathes out lies. Solomon's already mentioned lying, but he narrows it down to a specific area, a false witness. It's intentionally spreading false information, sharing malicious gossip, subtly misrepresenting truth, or character assassinations in people. The Bible tells us to put away evil, that slander and lies are a part of our old self, and God hates that. Number 7, a person that stirs up conflict and sows discord among relationships. God despises dissension and division among his people. Believers are meant to live in a community of unity, to live in love, to walk in truth, and to love each other. God's very, very against those that plant landmines of dissension through jealousy, false teaching, disagreements, and suspicion. God hates sin so much that he hates what it's done to his creation. He hates what it does to people's hearts and their relationships and their marriages and their families, communities, and even churches. He hates what it does to his church. He hates when it falls out in people's lives. I love what Billy Graham said. It says, it's God's love for man that prompts him to hate sin with a vengeance. The church has failed to remind this generation that while God is love, he also has the capacity to hate. He hates sin, and he will judge it with the fierceness of his wrath. We live in a world that glamorizes sin. It glamorizes pride. It glamorizes adultery. We live in a world that just a few decades ago, pornography was taboo. It was wrong. Sexual sin and sexual partners are just a normal part of someone's life now. Open marriages have just become a thing. All this is typical in Netflix series and movies. Drug and alcohol addictions are just things that are celebrated. Divorce has become normalized. It's just what happens when marriage gets hard. And oftentimes I've met with couples and they don't even use the word sin. It was a mistake or a lapse of judgment. They won't even use the word sin for an affair. There's a verse, Proverbs 26:11. It says, "A dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness." If you ever had a dog, there's a good chance that you've seen this. It's gross. It's such weird behavior. The dog has eaten something that has upset his stomach, and you see them in the yard, back arched, throwing up, getting sick. Then you think, well, it's over, and all of a sudden the dog puts his nose back on the ground and puts his nose in it and starts to eat what they just threw up. I apologize if you have a weak stomach. I do as well. It's why I think this verse is so telling about our sinful nature and what sin does to us. We, like dogs, move toward the things that make us sick. Just think about the sin that you struggle with, the sin that you confess over and over again, the sin that comes back up in your mind prior to taking communion. Why do we return to the sin that makes us sick? I think it's important for us to really understand the power of a habitual sin in our lives. I love this quote: "Sin will take you further than you ever wanted to go, keep you longer than you ever wanted to stay, and cost you far more than you ever thought it would cost." And this quote's not a surprise for most of us that have felt the sting of sin in our lives. We become soft on sin, or we think it's something that we can never resist or overcome, and it's just not true. The Bible isn't soft on sin at all, and God wants us to understand that our battle against the enemy is real and that sin is something we have to battle and fight against and run from. The Bible equips us to say no. It empowers us to resist and battle against. We're going to press pause here on part 1 on hate sin. If this podcast has encouraged you, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email at lockerroom@southland.church. We'd love to hear how this podcast has encouraged you. If we can help you in any way or even just try to help you take your next step, shoot us an email. We'd be happy to reach out to you and see how we can help. If this podcast has helped you, share it with a friend. I'm praying that God brings to mind some men in your life that should receive this from you. And just share it, saying, hey, I just want to really share this with you. It encouraged me, and I wanted to share it with you. I hope it encourages you too. You never know how sharing something like this might encourage someone else. That's it for today. Next week, we'll unpack part 2 of how we can hate sin and choose God's best for our lives. We'll catch you next time on Locker Room.